First of all, from Senator Gillibrand's office, the staff director for the Senate Special Committee on Aging and the Deputy Legislative Director, Claire Descamps. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, wonderful. And we also have the Executive Director of the New York City Office of Food Policy, Kate MacKenzie. So I'd love for you to come up here as well. Thank you so much. So I want to thank you both so much for being here. And by the way, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Kim Moscaritolo. I'm the State Policy Director for Hunger Free America, and I'm so happy to have everybody here today. So we're really lucky to have some really wonderful guests who work on these issues both at the local and the federal level. And so my first question is sort of a broad question to both of you, but seeing as we have a lot of business owners here, and we're talking specifically about programs related to restaurants, I just wanted to ask each of you if you could talk a little bit about maybe the sort of one or two policy priorities, or from a policy perspective, what are the one or two things that we think could help address the hunger issue, specifically from working with the business community and from folks in the business community? And so we'll start with you, Kate.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you, and it's so great to be here. Thanks to Hunger Free America and to all of you for making the time out of your busy days. You know, I've known Joel for a very long time, and I think, you know, some of this, 25 years ago, we could have said, we continue to say the same thing. Like, this isn't rocket science, right? What we need for people to be able to put food on their tables are jobs, well-paying jobs for people to be able to buy what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And that's still, unfortunately, the case. And so we will always push for ways to open up the very, very often flexible budgets that people have when it comes to food, because food is the item that you know, is not a fixed cost, and unfortunately it means that we have to buy less of something, especially right now. As we are seeing extraordinary volatility in prices in every grocery store we go into, you know, whether it's eggs, whether it's dairy, whether it is, you know, really you name it, the prices are really fluctuating, and that makes it really hard to be able to budget for what we need. So within the Mayor's Office of Food Policy, we're launching a research agenda that's really going to figure out the ways in which we can get a better handle on what we can do as a city, but also just being able to share the changes in food prices in a much more transparent way. So really getting a sense by neighborhood, by you know, sector, where we're seeing the food prices change and why, and also you know, we buy a lot of food in the city, and understanding how we can pay the right price for food in some of the contracts that we're locked into. But I also, you know, the congressman mentioned it, and you know, it's of course what is most front and center for us is thinking about beyond thinking about really determining strategies to be able to fight against some of the most egregious cuts to our safety net programs when it comes to SNAP. And trying to do, like, that's actually something that has had to evolve over the 25 years or so that I've been involved in this work, because we're hearing actually rather directly that talking about the impact on low-income families and the income on seniors, the impact on seniors is not going to work. That's really actually for some people exactly what it's meant to do. Is to create pain and suffering. And so we really need to find, and this is where I think some of the business owners in particular can be really helpful, and whether that is talking, we've had some initial conversations with Amazon and with other larger corporations to be able to talk about the impact on their workforce of some of these cuts in particular, and what that might mean to our economy. So thinking about, you know, we have unfortunately all too many people in the city that struggle to put meals on their tables. And if we look at a different population, the employed New Yorkers of businesses that have a lot of influence in Washington, that's a different approach that we can start to take.
That's great. Yeah, Claire.
Yeah. So. Make sure that's on. I think you're completely right. I think down in Washington at the federal level, things are a lot more inflexible, especially since the Democrats are in the minority in both chambers. Right now, we have to play a lot of defense with all the cuts that are coming from reconciliation or that are the restrictions that are coming out of the USDA. We want to provide more flexibility on how people access their food. The way that the SNAP program was set up, it kind of has this assumption that people are cooking from home and cooking from scratch. Not everyone has access to a refrigerator. Not everyone has access to a stove. People are eating differently than they did back in the 70s. Luckily, we had an update to the Thrifty Food Plan coming out of the USDA in 2023, but we've seen a lot of pushback from our colleagues across the aisle, which is very unfortunate because we're trying to reflect what is the cost of food, how do people eat, what are the dietary guidelines saying that what people should be eating. So I think at the federal level, engaging with the business community and the larger business community is going to be very important to kind of convincing our colleagues across the aisle that cutting SNAP and making it more inflexible, imposing restrictions on what you can buy with SNAP is not going to help the bottom line of businesses. And it's very unfortunate that we have to talk in dollars and cents versus this is the right thing to be doing. This is the right thing for our constituents. We don't want people going hungry. That should be kind of a no-brainer. And we do consistently do a lot of education and say this is how many people per district, this is how many people per state, this is how many people potentially are going to lose their jobs if there is like less demand. I mean, farmers are getting impacted if they don't have a market to sell to. So we're seeing a lot of bad things happening at once. If we weren't in this situation, I would say advocating for, at the very least, hot foods to be accepted under SNAP. I mean, I think the example that everyone always gives is a rotisserie chicken. You can't go and buy that because it's warm, even it can feed your family for a week or so. Or if you go to a store and you buy a panini when it's hot, you can't buy that with SNAP, but if it's cold and then you put it in the microwave, that's eligible, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So if we weren't in the current situation of potentially millions of people getting their benefits reduced or kicked off, that's what my answer would be.
Gotcha. So Susan gave us a lot of great information about restaurants who apply for this. I know, obviously, it's not a program that the city runs, but a lot of restaurants in New York City utilize the Restaurant Meals Program. And so I'm curious, from the city's perspective, some of the barriers that you've seen, and is there anything on the city level that can be done in terms of trying to address some of the barriers to participation in the Restaurant Meals Program?
Well, just coming in at the sort of the end of the session that I think was just so informative just now, you know, the linkages, the working with the small business services, et cetera, are the ways to help get people, restaurants in particular, aware of the program. We can do a better job at promoting those restaurants, right? And I do think, you know, just connecting this question to the last question too, I'm sure that there are, you know, I heard, unfortunately, Paris Baguette is not in, but because it's a name that's top of my head right now, like the chain of Paris Baguette, or I think Just Salad used to be, is, you know, right. And so when we think about like the roll up and the impact of like what now there's probably a great deal of sales or revenues within Just Salad, how can Just Salad start to use its voice to, you know, committees or members of Congress, because they're not part of the traditional groups that have often been pushing for this program. And what would, whether it's in our many grocery stores and other sorts of like affiliate groups, what would the impact of these cuts really mean to the workforce, to the economic engine? That's something that I think we can also start to organize around. But, you know, like in a city of, close to 2 million participants in the SNAP program, it can be hard to communicate a program that not everyone is eligible for. But we can do, we can always do better. We can always do better at working within our Department for Aging, or certainly our homeless services, to do some promotion, you know, on sites at shelters and the like. But we need to hear from others what we can do better. I think, as sort of not being on the ground in this sense, we are very clear that, and whether it's ideas or suggestions, we are quick to move on those and quick to act on them. And if there's a way that we can ensure that even more participants are utilizing this program, because to your point, especially within our shelter system, it's really, really unfortunate to think about not being able to cook a meal. But when you also don't have a hotel room that has anything beyond a microwave to be able to do that with. So I think these are just ways that are smarter, that are effective in getting people access to the food that they need and deserve to respond to their cultures and the needs given what they have access to.
Right. Claire, in your first answer, you talked about some of the federal initiatives like the Hot Meals Act. Obviously, it's in the current composition of Congress and the Senate, not always the most sympathetic ears to that. But I'm curious, and Kate touched on this, which I thought was interesting, which was really utilizing the business community. So I'm curious, nationally, if there have been efforts to do outreach to the business community, maybe to large corporations, even maybe focused on their own bottom line in terms of engaging them in trying to do the sort of advocacy needed to really make these policy changes. And, if you've seen that and what outreach is being done to the business community nationally.
Yeah, so I've had many meetings with various organizations, whether that's Walmart, whether that's Amazon, who are active in space in food delivery and making sure, who have a large purchasing population that utilizes SNAP, or even a lot of their workforce may be on SNAP. They are very concerned. I mean, they don't necessarily use that explicit language, but they will say, this will have an impact on us. I think, though, not speaking on behalf of those two companies, obviously, but what we've seen a larger trend of, if you are a private corporation and you kind of speak out against certain policies that this current administration is doing, that may not necessarily go in your favor. It may sometimes backfire a little bit. So we're doing a lot of behind the scenes work, having certain corporations reach out to some colleagues across the aisle to, especially if they have a large presence in their state or a large workforce in their state, to really show this doesn't just benefit New Yorkers, this benefits people in Arkansas and in Oklahoma. And I think that's one of the most important tools that we have in our toolbox, is making sure that people know that these programs exist, but kind of putting a face to the name. Senator Gillibrand is the ranking member on the Senate Aging Committee, and a program like Restaurant Meals Program is something she would bring up of, sometimes people don't know that these programs exist. If you're an older adult, if you're homebound, if you don't have access to something beyond a microwave, you may not know that you can use your SNAP benefits at a restaurant. It just wouldn't potentially even cross your mind. But it could be a lifeline for a lot of people who are unable to cook or don't have access to the tools to cook themselves a healthy meal. And it's something that she's brought up several times at some hearings about kind of the barrier when you are, like I said, an older adult or disabled or homebound. So I think this is an area that we would definitely want to look into a lot more. But as I said before, we don't necessarily have as many sympathetic ears at the moment. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're not doing long-term planning, just because we're responding to a lot of kind of bursts of things coming in the news, executive orders, what have they. That doesn't mean we're not doing our job of long-term positive policy making. It's just a little more difficult and something that we kind of have to do over a term versus every month a different thing happening.
Right, understood. I will stay with you for a moment, because obviously at Hunger Free America, we are big fans of the advocacy work necessary to make a lot of these changes. And obviously, we are very supportive of expanding access as much as possible. So, right now the Restaurant Meals Program is focused on folks who are unhoused, who are seniors, who, the very limited eligibility. For folks who would perhaps want to advocate for changes to the program, whether it's increasing eligibility, I'm just curious right now, given the circumstances, what do you think are some of the best avenues for that advocacy for folks who want to, continue to push the program further?
I know this is not something this isn't like a magic button, but calling your members of Congress, I know that that's something that sounds like a very cliche answer, but it actually does work when you really, like, truly light up a switchboard of an office. That moves the needle. There will be times when we kind of tell some advocates, like, okay, not go after that office, but like get your constituents to light up Senator Bozeman, get your constituents to light up Senator Grassley or what have you, and that really does work. I mean, we'll be coordinating with advocates, and they'll go and we say, we want X senator to work with us. Can you get a meeting with them, and can you bring some advocates from their state to come and talk to them about the importance of this program? Yes, we can do that. They'll have the meeting, we follow up, and they're like, wow, we actually met with a group of constituents that said that they really like this bill. I think we actually want to co-sponsor it, or I think that we actually want to work with you on it. And for us, if we need to compromise, that is fine. Any movement forward is positive for us. I mean, everyone wants these beautiful, I'm not going to use that phrase. Everyone wants these very large messaging bills that really leap us forward, and if we could do that, that would be absolutely wonderful. Not necessarily possible when when you're in the federal government, which is not known to be nimble, but any movement is positive movement. And honestly, engaging with your Congress members, whether that's letter writing campaigns, whether that's calling them, I have seen it work. I mean, it may not be instantaneous, but they hear it. They hear them getting ground down. They are like, okay, this is actually something that our constituents really care about. So let's see what we can do. Let's see where we can land in the middle. And again, I know it's not a magic bullet, but it's what we've seen most consistently work.
That's great. Kate, from the city level, I'm just curious, given the state of the world that we're in right now, what are the priorities from city government right now in terms of what you think in this coming year and perhaps going into next year, some of your priorities for fighting hunger in New York City from a policy perspective?
Yeah, this is, not just message control here, but like it is snap, snap, snap. Right? And school meals, school meals, school meals. Fortunately, and again, it's we will never be tired of saying thank you for the universal school meal passage, which was so essential and so timely on many levels. And as we are in the month of rolling out the, I think second year of summer EBT and school meals generally, thinking about ways that we can really double down on continuing to, get the word out about that program. But, and I have a great partner in Commissioner Park and, Ahmed Tagani at Housing. Like, this is really recognizing that we have, this isn't just a social service issue, this is impacting people's ability to pay for their housing and beyond. And so for us, it is really, again, showing the sort of, that the income and the dollars that we have available to us impact food budgets in many, many ways. And as many, public servants that we can have to share that message, that is essential to us, whether it's connecting it to the extraordinary threats around Medicaid, the extraordinary, complications around childcare, but it's always tying the food message together with that. And I believe that we've had incredible success in this administration with being able to talk about the food that we're providing to people that is essential for people, whether it's culture, whether it's affordability, and getting even better with ensuring that the benefits that we're providing are timely and delivered in a way that that works. So, there aren't always a whole lot of new initiatives, new and fancy initiatives. It's continuing to get better and better with what we're doing because it's so basic. It's food. It's just basic. And how we're able to contract with different places, different ways of delivering services, whether it is working to ensure that, a program like Groceries to Go, which started during the pandemic and is now continuing to be funded to make sure that People who otherwise would not have health insurance are able to get meals delivered to their home. Programs like this that are so tiny, it's often these tiny programs that are the most essential to people get recognition and continue to be funded. And ultimately, when we get to the place, right, we will get to the place when we can start, innovating again in the space of food and SNAP and benefits, and it's not going to be just the protect. But for now, that's where we are, and we've got to do our best to making sure that we're not, while there might be the appearance that people are sitting on their hands, it's how we are acting and making alliances in different ways, that it's not the traditional, out there, rah-rah, go get them type of approach.
And Claire, I'll just ask the same question from a federal level. What do you think is the sort of policy priority in the next year, 6 months to a year, at the federal level from your office?
Yeah, of course. I think, kind of following up on what you were just saying, I think making sure the problem is almost 3D. People aren't only thinking about SNAP. They're not only thinking about Medicaid. They're not only thinking about Social Security. They're thinking about all three. They're thinking about how are these three things and more impacting my ability to pay my rent, to buy my food, to get my health care. Really making sure that these aren't just statistics. These aren't just X million people are going to get kicked off of Medicaid, or this many thousand people are going to get kicked off of SNAP. But these are real people. These are your neighbor, this is your grandma, this is the teacher you had when you were growing up, that these are actual lives that are getting impacted. And that's something that we're working on a lot in our office, is really trying to get people to share their stories with either the public, with the Senate, with the broader community. It's all great when someone down in DC gives a speech about how important this is and how great it is, or how bad it is that we're cutting all these programs. It's completely different when you have someone saying, this is going to impact me. This is going to impact my life. This is how I'm not going to be able to support my grandchildren as much, or this is how I'm going to have to forego my health care for even longer, or I'm going to have to cut down on my prescriptions or have them or what have you. So other than that part, I think on the policy side, something that we're still working on in tandem with trying to push back on these cuts, is really trying to, I think, impact or eliminate as much as we can food deserts, especially in New York City. Senator Gillibrand leads a bill called the Healthy Food Financing Initiative Reauthorization Act. That is a public-private partnership to build or expand grocery stores. I love when people tell me, like, well, not necessarily from New York, but from other states, like, well, a food desert's only a mile in a city. That's not that far. I'm like, have you ever been to New York City? Do you know how far a mile is? I mean, not necessarily distance-wise, but that can be a completely different borough. You're not necessarily going to go all across the world to get to a grocery store. You're going to go to the bodega on your corner. You're going to go however many buses it takes or subway rides. You're not going to. A mile is a long way in a city like New York. So really making sure that our business community has that funding available from the federal government to expand access to services in their communities. Not necessarily something that I expect to move quickly or soon, but it's still something that it's worth talking about on the federal level. And one other thing we're going to be introducing soon, it's called Closing the Meal Gap Act. It's a very comprehensive bill, but one of the big things that I think would really make a difference is changing how we calculate SNAP benefits, and not just the Thrifty Food Plan, which is what is the absolute bare minimum amount we can give a family of four to buy a basket of groceries. We want to move it to a rung up, something called the low-cost food plan, which will give more money to people to actually be able to buy a full meal. We hear people kind of criticizing SNAP recipients for buying unhealthy food. You go to the grocery store and tell me, if you have X amount of dollars, are you going to buy a head of lettuce that is going to expire in like 3 days? Or are you going to buy 2 pounds of rice that could last you for a very long time? Or several cans of shelf-stable items? I'm sure if you're trying to stretch your dollars, you're not going to be going for the fresh food that is going to expire within a few days. So that kind of was a little bit meandering, but I think that's kind of the stuff that we're trying to do on the federal level, which, again, I feel like we're just kind of preaching to the choir right now, but even if it's not going to necessarily happen soon, it's still important to talk about what we should be focusing on.
Absolutely. Well, believe it or not, our time has already expired. Because time flies when you're having fun. So I want to thank so much Claire Descamps from Senator Gillibrand's office and Kate MacKenzie from the New York City Office of Food Policy so much for their expertise and their knowledge and for sharing their time with us. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, ladies.
Thank you, guys.